I still remember the sound of my mother crying behind the kitchen door the night everything changed. Not soft tears, not quiet pain. These were heavy, broken sobs that made the whole house feel cold. I stood in the hallway holding my suitcase, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But instead, my father looked at me with tired eyes and whispered, "You need to leave, Emily." At first, I thought I heard him wrong. Leave? This was my home, the same home where I grew up learning piano in the living room, where my mother braided my hair before school, where we used to laugh during late-night dinners. But that night, nobody was smiling. My younger brother stood near the stairs, avoiding eye contact. My aunt sat on the couch, pretending not to listen. And my mother, she couldn't even look at me. I felt my chest tighten. What did I do? I asked, my voice shaking. Nobody answered, until my father finally said the words that shattered me. "We know about the money." I froze. The money? 3 weeks ago, my grandmother's emergency savings had disappeared from her account, nearly $50,000. The whole family had been whispering about it ever since. Grandma had trusted only a few people with access to her home, and I was one of them. But I didn't take anything. Still, rumors spread fast, and somehow my parents believed them. "It wasn't me," I whispered. But my father slammed his hand against the table. "Stop lying." My mother burst into tears again. That hurt more than his anger, because deep down, I realized something terrifying. They had already chosen what to believe, and it wasn't me. That night, they packed my things into black trash bags, like I was some stranger who no longer belonged there. I walked out carrying pieces of my life in plastic bags, while neighbors quietly watched through their windows. The cold air hit my face as I stood alone on the sidewalk. No home, no family, no one listening. But what I didn't know that night was that the truth was already finding its way to me, and the people who pushed me out in tears would soon beg me to come back. For the next few weeks, I lived in a tiny motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old coffee and dust, but at least nobody looked at me with disappointment there. I spent most nights staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How could my own parents believe I would steal from Grandma? I worked 2 jobs growing up just to help with bills. I skipped college parties to care for my family when Dad lost work. I sacrificed years trying to hold everyone together. And yet, the second something went wrong, they let go of me so easily. That realization broke something inside me. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. I got a call from my grandmother. Her voice sounded weak. "Emily, can you come see me?" When I arrived at her house, she looked smaller somehow, fragile, tired, but her eyes still carried warmth. She held my hand tightly and whispered, "I never believed it was you." I nearly cried right there. Then she handed me an envelope. Inside were printed bank records and security camera screenshots from her neighbor's porch camera. The images made my stomach drop. My brother, Ryan, had been entering Grandma's house late at night the week before the money disappeared. At first, I couldn't breathe. Ryan? The same brother who hugged me goodbye while I stood crying on the sidewalk? But that wasn't the worst part. The bank records showed transfers connected to my father's business account. Suddenly, every strange conversation, every nervous look, every rushed accusation started making sense. They didn't accuse me because they believed I stole. They accused me because they needed someone else to blame. I felt sick. For days, I carried the truth alone. Part of me wanted to disappear forever. Another part wanted to scream. But then I remembered the look on my mother's face when she turned away from me, and something inside me changed. I stopped crying. I started planning. I copied every document, every screenshot, every bank transfer. And then came the family dinner. My aunt had invited everyone over to heal the family. The irony almost made me laugh. When I walked into that house again, the room went silent. My father stiffened immediately. Ryan looked pale. My mother's eyes filled with tears again, but this time something felt different. Fear. Dinner barely lasted 10 minutes before my father spoke coldly. "You shouldn't have come." I slowly stood up from the table. Then I placed the envelope in front of him. "You're right," I said quietly. "I shouldn't have to." My father opened the papers, and his entire face drained of color. Ryan whispered, "Dad," but it was already over. The truth was sitting right there between us, and nobody could hide from it anymore. The room exploded into silence. Not shouting, not anger, just silence so heavy it felt impossible to breathe. My father stared at the papers with trembling hands, while my mother covered her mouth in shock. My aunt finally whispered, "Tell me this isn't true." But nobody answered her, because they couldn't. The evidence exposed everything. Ryan had secretly taken Grandma's money after falling into debt from gambling and online trading schemes. My father discovered it almost immediately, but instead of reporting him, he helped cover it up. And when suspicion started spreading through the family, they gave everyone my name. I felt tears burning in my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears for the girl who stood outside that house carrying trash bags, believing she deserved rejection. My mother suddenly stood and walked towards me slowly. "Emily," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." But hearing those words didn't heal me the way I once imagined, because some wounds don't disappear just because the truth finally arrives. My father tried speaking too, but his voice cracked. "We made a mistake." A mistake. That word echoed in my mind. For them, it was a mistake. For me, it was months of loneliness, sleepless nights, shame, watching strangers judge me while my own family stayed silent. I looked directly at Ryan. "You watched me destroy," I said softly, "and you said nothing." He broke down crying right there at the table. But what shocked everyone most was Grandma. She slowly stood from her chair and said, "Emily was the only person who stayed kind through all of this." Then she looked at my father, and kindness matters more than blood. A week later, the truth spread through the entire family. My father's business reputation collapsed after financial investigations began. Ryan entered counseling and eventually admitted everything publicly. And me? I never moved back home, because exposing the truth wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. I found a small apartment across town. I started rebuilding my life quietly, one peaceful day at a time. Grandma visited often, and for the first time in years, I felt safe around someone again. Months later, my mother sent me a letter. Not excuses, not guilt, just honesty. She wrote, "I was so afraid of losing our family that I ended up losing you instead." And strangely, that was the moment I finally found peace. Because sometimes the deepest betrayal doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the people you would have trusted with your heart. But I learned something important through all that pain. When people reject you without hearing your truth, their silence says more about them than it ever will about you. And sometimes walking away with your dignity is the strongest revenge of all.